Imagine spending $11 million in 1919. That's over $300 million in today's money on a single house, not just any house, the second largest private residence ever built in America. 127 rooms, sitting on 443 acres of manicured gardens and grounds, built for a man who controlled more wealth than most countries possessed at the time. Now imagine that same palace, abandoned, vandalized, stripped of everything valuable, windows shattered, ceilings collapsed, copper piping ripped from the walls by thieves, a $300 million monument to excess left to rot for decades. And here's what no one's talking about. This wasn't just another rich family losing their fortune. This was the systematic destruction of America's most elaborate private estate. And the reasons why it happened reveal everything wrong with how the ultra-wealthy built their empires during the Gilded Age. I'm going to show you exactly how Otto Hermann Kahn, one of the most powerful financiers in American history, created this palace. I'll give you the real construction costs, the actual staff numbers, and the maintenance figures that bankrupted his heirs. Then, I'll show you the shocking truth about what happened after his death, the vandalism, the failed rescue attempts, and the staggering cost to bring it back from complete ruin. If you're ready to see what really happened to America's most extravagant abandoned palace, let's begin. Otto Hermann Kahn arrived in New York in 1893 with almost nothing. He was a 26-year-old German Jewish immigrant who had worked in banking houses across Europe. Within 20 years, he became one of the 5 wealthiest men in America. By 1914, when he started building Oheka Castle, his personal fortune exceeded $400 million. That's over $12 billion in today's money. Let me repeat that, $12 billion. But that wasn't his real power. Kahn controlled Kuhn, Loeb and Company, one of the most influential investment banks on Wall Street. He personally financed the reorganization of the Union Pacific Railroad, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, and the Missouri Pacific Railroad. He underwrote millions in bonds for American companies expanding across the continent. When Kahn spoke, markets moved. When he invested, industries transformed. Here's the part people don't understand. Kahn didn't just make money from railroads and banking. He was a patron of the arts, on a scale America had never seen. He personally funded the Metropolitan Opera for decades, keeping it solvent through multiple financial crises. He brought the Russian ballet to America. He financed Broadway productions. He supported hundreds of artists, composers, and performers, and he did this while simultaneously running a financial empire that touched every major industry in the country. So when Kahn decided to build a country estate, he didn't want something modest. He wanted to make a statement. He wanted to prove that an immigrant could build something more magnificent than the old money families who had snubbed him. He wanted a palace that would rival the great château of France, and he had the money to do it. In 1914, Kahn purchased 443 acres on the highest point of Long Island, Cold Spring Hills. The elevation mattered. At 390 feet above sea level, it was the highest natural point between Manhattan and Montauk. From the castle's terraces, you could see both the Long Island Sound to the north and the Atlantic Ocean to the south. Kahn named it Oheka, combining the first letters of his name, Otto Hermann Kahn. The construction took 5 years, 1914 to 1919, right through World War I. While Europe burned and America mobilized for war, Kahn imported Italian stonemasons, French landscape architects, and British craftsmen to build his dream. He hired architects Delano and Aldrich, the same firm that designed mansions for the Rockefellers and Astors. The lead architect was William Adams Delano, who had studied at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. Here are the real numbers. The main chateau contained 127 rooms, spread across 109,000 square feet. Compare that to the White House at 55,000 square feet. Oheka was twice the size of the president's residence. The building required 6 million bricks. The exterior walls were constructed from limestone and concrete, reinforced with steel. The roof alone used over 60 tons of slate imported from Vermont. The grand staircase was modeled after the Château de Fontainebleau outside Paris. It rose through 3 floors with balustrades carved from Italian marble. The formal gardens stretched across 23 acres, designed by the Olmsted brothers, the same landscape architects who created Central Park. They installed fountains, reflecting pools, formal walkways lined with European statuary, and geometric hedgerows that took a team of 18 full-time gardeners to maintain. But that wasn't the real cost. The infrastructure required to support this palace exceeded anything built for a private residence at the time. Kahn constructed a private power plant to generate electricity for the estate. He built a water purification system drawing from underground wells. He installed a heating system that burned through tons of coal every winter. He created a telephone switchboard system connecting every room. He even built a private fire department with its own equipment and staff because the nearest municipal fire station was too far away to be useful. The total construction cost, $11 million. In today's money, that's over $320 million just to build it. And here's the kicker. That number doesn't include the furnishings, the art collection, or the ongoing operational costs. Kahn spent an additional fortune filling his palace. He imported furniture from France, Italy, and England, tapestries from Belgium, Persian rugs worth hundreds of thousands each, paintings by European masters, crystal chandeliers from Czechoslovakia. The library alone contained over 10,000 volumes, many of them first editions in rare manuscripts. The music room featured a custom-built pipe organ with over 3,000 pipes. The dining room could seat 200 guests. The table service included china custom-designed with a Oheka crest, sterling silver flatware, and baccarat crystal. Kahn kept multiple complete sets because he regularly hosted gatherings of 100 or more people. The kitchen required a staff of 12 just to prepare meals, industrial-scale stoves, multiple ovens, walk-in refrigerators cooled by an early ice-making system. Now, let's talk about the staff numbers. This is where the real cost becomes clear. Kahn employed a permanent staff of 126 people to run Oheka. Let me break that down. 18 gardeners for the grounds, 32 housekeepers and maids for interior cleaning, 12 kitchen staff, 8 chauffeurs and mechanics for the automobile garage, 24 general laborers for maintenance and repairs, 14 security guards patrolling the grounds 24 hours a day, plus butlers, valets, secretaries, and administrative staff. Each staff member received housing, meals, and wages. The annual payroll exceeded $500,000. In today's money, that's over $15 million per year just in labor costs. Add fuel for heating, electricity generation, food for the household and staff, supplies and ongoing repairs, and the annual operating cost reached approximately $800,000. $24 million per year in today's terms. But here's what nobody talks about. Kahn was only at Oheka for part of the year. He maintained a townhouse in Manhattan, traveled extensively to Europe, and spent time at other properties. The palace operated at full capacity with complete staff whether Kahn was present or not. The gardens needed constant maintenance. The heating system couldn't be shut down in winter without risking frozen pipes. The security had to remain because the property was filled with millions of dollars in art and furnishings. During the 1920s, Oheka became the center of high society on Long Island. Kahn hosted lavish parties attended by politicians, industrialists, artists, and celebrities. F. Scott Fitzgerald allegedly used Oheka as inspiration for Jay Gatsby's mansion in The Great Gatsby. The rumor persists, though it's never been definitively proven. What is proven? Fitzgerald knew Kahn personally and attended events at estates along the North Shore of Long Island, which locals called the Gold Coast. The guest list read, like a who's who of power and influence, presidents visited, Supreme Court justices, captains of industry, European nobility on American tours, celebrity performers who played private concerts in the music room. These weren't casual weekend visits. Kahn's parties lasted days, with guests staying in the numerous bedrooms, attended by personal servants, entertained with formal dinners, musical performances, and elaborate outdoor events in the gardens. Here's a specific example. In 1924, Kahn hosted a garden party for over 500 guests. The event required months of planning. Temporary structures were built on the lawns. Additional staff were hired for the occasion. Thousands of flowers were planted specifically for that weekend. The food and wine alone cost over $50,000, roughly $1.5 million in today's money, for one party. And Kahn did this regularly, not just once a year, multiple times per season. The palace became a tool for his business and social connections. Deals were negotiated over dinner, partnerships formed during weekend stays, political influence cultivated through carefully orchestrated gatherings. Oheka wasn't just a home, it was a machine for generating and maintaining power. But that wasn't the complete picture. While Kahn entertained the elite, he also used Oheka for philanthropy. He hosted fundraising events for the Metropolitan Opera. He brought artists and musicians to perform for charitable causes. He opened the gardens to local schools and organizations for special events. This wasn't entirely altruistic. Every act of generosity enhanced his social standing and softened his image as a ruthless financier. Here's the truth that destroys the romantic image of Gilded Age palaces. Oheka was financially unsustainable from day one, even for a man worth $12 billion in today's money. Spending $24 million annually to maintain a second home represents 0.2% of total wealth. That might sound manageable, but here's the problem. Wealth during the Gilded Age wasn't as liquid as modern fortunes. Kahn's fortune was tied up in railroad bonds, corporate equity, real estate holdings, and partnership stakes in Kuhn, Loeb and Company. His actual annual liquid income, while enormous by any standard, had to support multiple households, his art patronage, business investments, political contributions, and personal expenses. The Oheka operation alone consumed a significant portion of his annual disposable income. Let me show you the math. Conservative estimates suggest Kahn's annual liquid income ranged between $5 and $10 million in the 1920s. That's roughly $150 to $300 million in today's terms. Oheka's annual costs of $800,000 represented 8 to 16% of his liquid annual income. Add his Manhattan townhouse, his art acquisitions, his Metropolitan Opera support, and other philanthropic commitments, and suddenly his expenses approached or exceeded his income in many years. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was that Oheka couldn't be scaled down. You couldn't maintain half a palace. The infrastructure required constant full operation. The gardens died without their 18 gardeners. The building deteriorated without continuous maintenance. The security couldn't be reduced without risking theft of the valuable contents. It was all or nothing. And here's what no one considers. The property generated zero income. Unlike a commercial building that could be rented, or productive farmland that generated crops, or timber property that produced lumber, Oheka was pure expense. Every dollar spent on the palace was gone forever. No return, no income, pure consumption. Other wealthy families faced similar challenges. The Vanderbilts built multiple massive estates and watched them consume their fortune. The Astors struggled to maintain their properties as tax laws changed and social expectations shifted. But most wealthy families could at least partially offset costs through productive land use or strategic property management. Oheka offered nothing but prestige and social capital. Otto Kahn died on March 29, 1934. He was 66 years old. Heart attack, sudden. He had been in declining health but remained active in business and social affairs until the end. His death immediately triggered a crisis for Oheka. Here's what happened to his estate. Kahn's will divided his fortune among his wife, 4 children, and numerous charitable bequests. His total estate was valued at approximately $50 million at the time of his death. In today's money, that's roughly $1 billion. Sounds enormous. But remember, at his peak in the mid-1920s, he had been worth perhaps $400 million. The Great Depression and the 1929 stock market crash had destroyed 70 to 80% of his wealth. His heirs inherited a complicated situation. They received cash, securities, real estate holdings, and art collections. They also inherited Oheka, which came with its crushing operational costs and zero income. The estate's executors immediately recognized the problem. No individual heir had sufficient liquid wealth to maintain the palace. Even pooling resources, the family couldn't justify spending what would amount to millions of dollars annually in today's terms on a property none of them wanted to live in full-time. The market for such properties had completely collapsed. During the Depression, wealthy families were selling estates, not buying them. Tax laws had changed dramatically. The federal income tax, which barely existed before 1913, now reached confiscatory levels for the highest earners. Estate taxes consumed significant portions of inherited wealth. Property taxes on a 443-acre estate with a palace had become ruinous. Within months of Kahn's death, his heirs made the decision. They would sell Oheka. They listed it with real estate agents. They advertised it to potential buyers. They reached out to institutions that might convert it to alternative uses. And they found no buyers. Not at their asking price, not at reduced prices, not at any price that made economic sense. Here's why. Who could afford to buy it? Not other wealthy families who were themselves struggling with Depression-era economics and crushing estate maintenance costs. Not corporations, which had no use for a residential palace. Not the government, which had no budget for acquiring luxury properties. The property was too expensive to maintain as a private residence, too large and elaborate to convert to practical commercial use, too isolated to serve as a hotel or resort. For 3 years after Kahn's death, Oheka sat mostly empty. The family maintained minimal staff to prevent complete deterioration. Perhaps a dozen workers, down from the original 126. They focused on essential maintenance, heating system operation in winter, basic security, preventing water damage. The gardens went untended. The elaborate formal landscaping began reverting to wild growth. Fountains stopped working, reflecting pools stagnated. In 1937, the family finally found a solution. The Eastern Military Academy, a private boarding school, agreed to lease the property with an option to purchase. The school needed space for its growing enrollment. The castle offered dormitories, classrooms, dining facilities, and ample grounds for military drills and athletics. The deal must have seemed perfect for both parties. For the Kahn family, it meant someone else would shoulder the maintenance costs. The school would preserve the building through active use. There was hope that long-term occupation might eventually lead to a purchase, allowing the family to liquidate this massive liability from the estate. For the school, it meant prestige. Operating from a genuine Gilded Age palace gave the institution cachet. The facilities, while elaborate, were functional for educational purposes. The grounds provided space for their programs, and the rental terms were likely favorable, given the family's desperation to avoid total loss. But here's what actually happened. The school moved in and immediately began modifying the property for institutional use. They converted the grand bedrooms into dormitory spaces with multiple bunk beds. They installed institutional kitchens. They built additional structures on the grounds for classrooms and administrative offices. They painted over elaborate wall decorations. They removed or stored valuable furnishings to prevent damage. This wasn't vandalism. It was practical adaptation. A boarding school couldn't operate in a museum-quality palace. But every modification reduced Oheka's value as a historic property. Every institutional addition compromised its architectural integrity. The building was being used, which prevented total abandonment, but it was also being slowly transformed into something completely different from what Kahn had envisioned. The Eastern Military Academy operated at Oheka through the 1940s and into the 1950s. During World War II, the property served military-related educational functions. After the war, enrollment grew as veterans sought education under the GY Bill. The castle housed hundreds of students. The grounds saw constant activity, but the elegant gardens continued deteriorating. The elaborate infrastructure began failing. Original systems designed for residential luxury couldn't handle institutional demands. By the early 1960s, the Eastern Military Academy was struggling financially. Private military boarding schools were declining in popularity. Enrollment dropped. Revenue fell. Maintenance costs for the aging property increased. In 1968, the school closed permanently and vacated Oheka. The property reverted to the Kahn estate. By this point, Otto Kahn's heirs had mostly died or moved on with their lives. The estate was handled by executors and lawyers. And nobody wanted this white elephant. They listed it for sale again. No buyers. They attempted to interest other schools or institutions. No takers. They explored demolition, but even that would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to execute properly. So Oheka sat empty. Completely empty. No staff, no security, no maintenance, just a massive abandoned palace on 443 acres of overgrown land. And this is where the real destruction began. Within months, vandals discovered the unprotected property. They broke windows to gain entry. They spray-painted graffiti on the Italian marble and limestone walls. They smashed crystal chandeliers for fun. They ripped copper piping from the walls to sell for scrap. They tore out brass fixtures, door handles, decorative metalwork, anything with resale value. They built fires in the elegant rooms, blackening ceilings and walls. They destroyed what they couldn't steal. The destruction accelerated through the 1970s. Different groups used the abandoned castle. Teenagers held parties in the ruins. Drug users occupied rooms. Homeless people sought shelter in the structure during winter. Each new group of occupants added to the damage. More windows shattered, more walls defaced, more fixtures stolen. The roof began leaking, water damage spread, ceilings collapsed in multiple rooms, floors rotted, mold spread everywhere. Here are the specific losses documented in later restoration reports. 90% of the original light fixtures gone, all copper piping stripped, most brass fixtures and hardware stolen. 70% of the window glass shattered, extensive portions of decorative plasterwork destroyed, multiple marble fireplace surrounds sledgehammered and removed, sections of the grand staircase's marble balustrade broken, portions of the elaborate wooden paneling removed or burned for firewood. The gardens fared no worse, but no better. Without maintenance, the formal layouts completely disappeared. The 23 acres of manicured landscape reverted to wild overgrowth. Trees grew unchecked. Hedgerows became impassable thickets. The fountains and reflecting pools filled with debris and stagnant water. Statuary toppled and broke. Pathways vanished under vegetation. The Olmsted brothers' masterpiece of landscape architecture essentially ceased to exist. By the late 1970s, Oheka Castle was a ruin, not a romantic, picturesque ruin, an actual dangerous collapsing structure that local authorities considered a hazard. The town of Huntington, which had jurisdiction, issued multiple violations. They threatened demolition orders. They demanded the owners secure the property or face penalties. But the estate had no money to do either. The property had negative value at this point. It would cost more to fix or demolish than it could possibly sell for. During the early 1980s, several developers and investors investigated purchasing Oheka. The property's real estate value was substantial. 443 acres on Long Island, even with a ruined palace, represented potentially valuable land for development. But every proposal faced impossible challenges. The first challenge was zoning. The property sat in a residential zone with strict building restrictions. Any development would require zoning variances from the town. Local residents opposed any plans for commercial development, high-density housing, or subdivision of the estate. Historical preservation groups, despite the ruined condition, argued the property had historical significance and should be protected. The second challenge was the castle itself. Developers couldn't simply demolish it and start fresh. The building was now being evaluated for landmark status. Preservation societies argued that even in ruins, Oheka represented significant architectural heritage. The cost to demolish the structure properly, with asbestos abatement and safe removal of materials, exceeded $2 million. In today's money, that's over $6 million just to tear it down. The third challenge was infrastructure. The property's private power plant had long since failed. The water systems were contaminated. The roads and pathways were crumbling. Any new use would require complete infrastructure replacement. The cost estimates ranged from $5 to $10 million before any actual renovation or new construction could begin. Multiple developers walked away. The numbers didn't work. The regulatory challenges were insurmountable. The public opposition was fierce. Oheka seemed destined for complete destruction through neglect. Local newspapers ran articles about the haunted castle and the fallen palace of the Gold Coast. Photographers documented the ruins. It became a symbol of Gilded Age excess meeting modern economic reality. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was that nobody could envision a viable use for a 127-room French chateau in suburban Long Island in the 1980s. Hotels? Too isolated from major attractions, too expensive to convert properly. Conference center? No major corporations or institutions nearby to support bookings. Museum? Who would fund operations and maintenance? Private residence? No individual had both the wealth and the desire to take on such a project. In 1984, a Long Island developer named Gary Melius visited Oheka for the first time. He was 41 years old. He had made his money developing residential properties, shopping centers, and commercial real estate across Long Island. He was not old money. He was not Gilded Age aristocracy. He was a self-made developer who saw opportunity where others saw disaster. Melius walked through the ruins and made a decision that everyone considered insane. He would buy the property, he would restore the castle, he would convert it into a functioning hotel and event space, and he would do it properly, maintaining historical integrity while creating a viable commercial operation. The professionals told him it couldn't be done. The cost would be prohibitive, the regulatory challenges insurmountable. The market didn't exist for such a property. He bought it anyway. The purchase price was approximately $1.5 million for the entire property. In today's terms, roughly $4 million. Sounds cheap for 443 acres with a palace. But remember, he was buying a hazardous ruin that came with millions in required restoration costs and no guarantee of ever recouping the investment. Melius immediately commissioned detailed engineering and architectural surveys. The results were worse than expected. The structure was in critical condition. Load-bearing walls had been compromised. The roof required complete replacement. All mechanical systems were destroyed and needed full replacement. Every window had to be replaced. Floors throughout the building were unsafe. Multiple sections of the building were at risk of collapse. The initial restoration estimate came in at $20 million. In today's money, that's approximately $55 million. And everyone knew that initial estimates on historic restoration projects typically underestimated final costs by 50 to 100%. Melius was looking at potentially spending $100 million or more in today's terms on a property in the middle of nowhere with no proven market for luxury hotel rooms and event space. But here's what Melius understood that others missed. Long Island had limited options for luxury event venues. Wealthy residents needed places for weddings, corporate events, and social gatherings. The suburbs were expanding. New money was being made in Manhattan and needed places to spend it on status events. If he could create a genuinely spectacular venue, he could command premium prices that might, eventually, justify the investment. The restoration of Oheka Castle became one of the largest private historic preservation projects in American history. Melius hired Lester R. Enton as the project architect. Enton specialized in historic restoration. They assembled teams of craftsmen, many from Europe, who possessed the skills necessary to recreate the original work. The project began with stabilization. Before any restoration could proceed, they had to prevent further collapse. They installed temporary supports throughout the structure. They waterproofed the building to stop ongoing water damage. They secured all entry points against further vandalism. This phase alone took over a year and cost millions. Then came the systematic restoration, room by room, system by system. They completely replaced the roof with new slate, matching the original Vermont slate as closely as possible. They rebuilt or repaired every window, installing historically accurate frames and glass. They restored the elaborate plasterwork, hiring specialists who could recreate the original decorative moldings and ceiling details. They refurbished the grand staircase, repairing damaged marble and replacing missing sections with carefully matched stone. The mechanical systems required complete replacement. New heating and air conditioning systems designed to work within the historic structure without compromising its appearance. New electrical systems meeting modern building codes while hiding contemporary infrastructure within historic details. New plumbing throughout, new elevators installed in service areas to meet modern accessibility requirements while keeping them invisible from public spaces. The gardens presented their own massive challenge. Melius brought in landscape architects to study historic photographs and plans. They cleared decades of overgrowth. They recreated the formal garden layouts using the Olmsted brothers' original design principles. They replanted thousands of plants, trees, and shrubs. They restored fountains and reflecting pools. They rebuilt pathways and installed period-appropriate lighting. The garden restoration alone cost approximately $5 million in 1980s money. Here are the real numbers on the restoration. The project took approximately 20 years to complete phases of varying intensity. The total expenditure exceeded $40 million by the early 2000s. In today's money, that's approximately $90 to $100 million. Combined with the purchase price, Melius invested roughly $105 million in today's dollars into Oheka. But that wasn't the complete cost. Melius also had to carry the property during restoration. Property taxes, insurance, security, utilities, legal fees for zoning approvals and building permits, marketing costs as he began operations, interest on loans financing the project. The carrying costs easily added another $20 to $30 million in today's terms. Total investment, over $130 million. Here's what nobody discusses about Oheka Castle and why this story matters far beyond one mansion. The failure and near destruction of this palace reveals 5 critical truths about wealth, display, and financial sustainability that apply just as much today as they did in the Gilded Age. I'll show you each reason, and then I'll connect them to modern examples you'll recognize immediately. Reason 1. The construction cost is never the real cost. Otto Kahn spent $11 million, over $300 million in today's money, building Oheka. But that was just the beginning. The annual operating cost of $24 million in today's terms meant he needed to generate that income every single year forever. Over 30 years of operation, the true cost exceeded $1 billion. Modern celebrities and athletes make exactly the same mistake. They buy mansions for $50 or $100 million and never properly calculate that a $50 million property requires perhaps $2 to $5 million annually in maintenance, staff, security, utilities, and taxes. Over 20 years, that's another $40 to $100 million. The purchase price is just the entry fee. The real cost is the forever cost. Reason 2. Assets that generate zero income are financial black holes regardless of their prestige value. Oheka produced no revenue. Zero. Every dollar spent was consumption, not investment. The property had social value and prestige value, but those don't pay bills. Today's equivalent is professional athletes buying massive mansions, luxury car collections, and jewelry. A $10 million watch is worth $10 million until you need to sell it, at which point you might get $6 million if you're lucky. It generated zero income while you owned it. It depreciated the moment you bought it, and it tied up capital that could have been earning returns. This is exactly what destroyed Oheka's value after Kahn died. Nobody wanted to buy something that cost millions annually and generated nothing. Reason 3. Infrastructure scales poorly downward, but expenses scale perfectly upward. You couldn't maintain Oheka with half the staff. The building required its full complement of workers, or it deteriorated. The gardens needed their 18 gardeners, or they died. But if you wanted to expand operations, every addition required proportional increases in expense. This is the trap of lifestyle inflation. Today's lottery winners and sudden wealth individuals face identical problems. They buy the big house, hire the staff, acquire the cars and boats. Then they discover they can't scale back without losing everything. But they also can't increase their income to match their expanding taste for luxury. They're trapped in an expensive lifestyle that consumes all their resources. Reason 4. The wealthy to poor pipeline isn't gradual, it's catastrophic. Kahn died wealthy, his heirs inherited wealth, but they couldn't maintain the palace. Within 3 years, they were desperate to unload it. Within 30 years, it was a vandalized ruin worth less than the land it sat on. The wealth didn't erode gradually, it hit a tipping point and collapsed. We see this pattern repeatedly today. Mike Tyson earned $400 million during his boxing career. He declared bankruptcy owing $23 million. Sudden collapse, not gradual decline. Nicolas Cage earned over $150 million. He faced foreclosure and owed the IRS $6.3 million. Sudden collapse. Allen Iverson earned $200 million. He couldn't access his trust fund because he was broke and in debt. The pattern is identical to what happened to Oheka. The expenses continued at the same rate while income suddenly dropped. Reason 5. Status display is a competitive game nobody wins. Kahn built Oheka partially to compete with other Gilded Age families. The Vanderbilts, the Astors, the Morgans, each one built more elaborate estates to outdo the others. But here's what happened to every single one of them. Within 2 generations, most Gilded Age estates were sold, demolished, or abandoned. The Vanderbilt mansions in Newport, the Astor properties, the Carnegie estates, almost all gone or converted to museums and hotels. The competition to display wealth bankrupted entire family lines. Today's equivalent is visible everywhere: luxury car leases, designer clothing, Instagram-worthy vacations, massive homes in exclusive neighborhoods, each purchase designed to signal status to others who are also spending themselves into financial stress to signal status back. Nobody wins. Everyone just spends more until they can't sustain it anymore. The only difference between Oheka and a modern McMansion foreclosure is the scale. The pattern is identical. So what happened after Gary Melius completed the restoration? Did his massive gamble pay off? The answer is complicated and reveals even more about the economics of luxury properties. Oheka Castle reopened as a hotel and event venue in the early 2000s. Melius positioned it as ultra-luxury. Wedding venue prices started at $25,000 and went up to over $100,000 for elaborate multi-day events. Hotel rooms ran from $400 to over $2,000 per night. Corporate events, film shoots, photo sessions all commanded premium pricing. The property became popular. The restoration quality was genuinely exceptional. The setting was spectacular. Wealthy New York families booked weddings years in advance. Celebrities held events there. Film and television productions used it as a location. It appeared in multiple movies and TV shows, generating additional publicity. By the late 2000s, Oheka was operating successfully and generating significant revenue. But here are the real numbers nobody mentions. Even at full capacity with premium pricing, the property barely breaks even on its operating costs. The staff required to run a luxury hotel and event space numbers over 100 people. The maintenance on a historic property never ends. Every system requires constant attention. The gardens need year-round care. Insurance on a property valued at over $60 million costs hundreds of thousands annually. Property taxes exceed $500,000 per year. Melius himself admitted in interviews that Oheka doesn't generate significant profit. It covers its costs, it maintains itself, it preserves the property. But the return on his $130 million investment is essentially zero in pure financial terms. He did it for legacy, for passion, for the achievement, not for profit. And here's the kicker. In 2014, Gary Melius was shot in the head in Oheka's parking lot. He survived but never fully recovered. The shooting remains unsolved. The attack was apparently connected to business disputes unrelated to Oheka itself, but it highlighted the personal costs of operating such a property. The stress, the financial pressure, the constant attention and scrutiny. After the shooting, Melius stepped back from day-to-day operations. The property continues functioning under professional management. It remains successful by operational measures, but it still doesn't generate meaningful returns compared to the capital invested. It's essentially a self-sustaining historic preservation project funded by luxury event fees. So what does Oheka Castle teach us? What's the real lesson from this 100-year saga of construction, excess, abandonment, and resurrection? The lesson is this: wealth display and wealth preservation are opposite strategies. Otto Kahn built Oheka to display his wealth, power, and cultural sophistication. Every dollar he spent on the palace was a dollar that couldn't compound, couldn't generate returns, couldn't build sustainable multi-generational wealth. He chose display. And when he died, his heirs couldn't maintain what he built because the display consumed resources without creating them. Compare that to other wealthy families who took different approaches. The Rockefellers diversified into productive assets, oil wells, real estate that generated rent, businesses that produced profits. Their wealth survived and grew across generations. The Rothschilds, in Europe, followed similar strategies. Wealth invested in income-generating assets rather than consumed in palatial displays. Gary Melius rescued Oheka through passion and determination, but even he couldn't make it financially rational. He created something culturally valuable. He preserved an important piece of architectural history. He built a successful business. But he didn't create wealth. He consumed it in a different way than Kahn did, but consumed it nonetheless. Here's the modern application. Every financial decision falls somewhere on a spectrum between wealth display and wealth building. Buying a luxury car is display. Investing in an index fund is building. Living in a mansion is display. Living modestly and investing the difference is building. Designer clothes, jewelry, expensive vacations, all display. Boring, diversified investments, compound interest, patient long-term growth, all building. Neither approach is morally wrong. Display has value, it signals success, it creates experiences, it brings joy. But you need to understand what you're doing. Kahn understood exactly what he was doing. He was spending his fortune on something that mattered to him. His mistake was assuming his heirs would value the same things he did and would have the resources to maintain his vision. They didn't, and they couldn't. The ultra-wealthy today make the same mistakes constantly. They buy sports teams that consume cash. They build massive compounds that require armies of staff. They collect art and cars and properties around the world. Each acquisition increases their expenses and complexity while generating zero passive income. Then they wonder why their wealth doesn't last, why their children struggle to maintain what they built, why the third generation loses everything. Here's the final truth about Oheka Castle. It should never have been built, not because it's not beautiful, it's spectacular, not because it has no value, it has enormous historical and cultural value, but because it represents a fundamentally unsustainable approach to wealth. $11 million in construction costs, $24 million annually in operating costs over 30 years, another $100 million to rescue it from ruin. All to create something that generated zero financial return for anyone involved across its entire century-long history. Otto Kahn would have been wealthier if he'd lived modestly and invested the difference. His heirs would have inherited more if the palace had never been built. Gary Melius would have made more money developing strip malls, but none of them regret it. Kahn got his palace and his status. His heirs sold off what they needed to and moved on with their lives. Melius got his legacy project and the satisfaction of rescuing an architectural masterpiece. Maybe that's worth more than compound interest. Maybe there's value in creating beauty, even if it makes no financial sense. Or maybe that's just what we tell ourselves to justify consuming wealth instead of building it. Maybe the real lesson of Oheka is that the choice between display and preservation reveals everything about our values and our financial future. And maybe most people, given the choice between living in a palace for a few decades or building sustainable wealth for generations, choose the palace every single time. That's what happened during the Gilded Age. That's what destroyed most of those great estates. That's what's happening today with lottery winners and athletes and celebrities who earn fortunes and lose them just as quickly. The pattern hasn't changed in 100 years. We just have different names for the same mistakes. Oheka Castle stands today as a monument to those mistakes. Beautiful, expensive, unsustainable, and completely, utterly human. If you found this deep dive valuable, consider subscribing. I research the real economics behind historical properties, business failures, and wealth destruction that nobody else talks about. Next time, I'll show you what really happened to the Winchester Mystery House and why it bankrupted one of America's wealthiest widows, despite her spending only a fraction of her fortune on construction. The numbers will shock you. Thanks for watching. And remember, the most expensive thing you'll ever buy is probably something you can't afford to maintain.